Okay, so we all pretty much know the story of the 18th century Enlightenment, right? We call it the Great Age of Reason, the moment that supposedly pulled humanity out of darkness. But what if that whole story, the one we've all been told about science and logic winning the day, isn't quite the full picture? Well, the source material we're digging into for this explainer presents a radically different take. It doesn't just ask us to question the Enlightenment, it flat out argues that the entire Age of Reason might have been a meticulously planned, large-scale deception. So let's get right to the core argument. The idea here is that the Enlightenment wasn't progress at all. In fact, it was the exact opposite. The source gives it a pretty stark name, the Great Disconnection. It was the moment, it claims, that a corrupt new operating system was installed for all of humanity. And get this, according to the source, this was no accident, not even close. It was a full-blown operation, orchestrated by a group it calls the Ringmasters, from a so-called Trinity of Nations, France, England, and Germany. Now, where the source begins its argument is absolutely fascinating. With the name itself. It proposes that the word Enlightenment isn't just a historical label we came up with later. Nope. It's actually a hidden 5-part cipher that reveals the entire plan from the very start. Okay, so let's break this down. First, you have N, which is said to mean an enclosure, like the pen. Then comes lie, which is exactly what it sounds like, the great deception at the heart of the whole project. Next is 10. And if you think of the Roman numeral X, the source calls this the sacred number of the sun. Then you have men, which refers to us, humanity, the subjects of this deception. And that final T, that's interpreted as the Tau cross, a symbol for a great sacrifice. So when you put all those pieces back together, the word Enlightenment completely transforms. It becomes this really chilling mission statement. It becomes the lie of the sun told to the men of the pen that will culminate in the great sacrifice. I mean, that is a truly startling claim. But you might be asking, how could a deception on this massive a scale actually be pulled off? Well, the source describes it as a kind of philosophical war, a major clash between two totally opposing worldviews it calls the solar philosophy and the lunar principle. So on one side of this battlefield, you've got the lunar principle, or alpha. This represents everything to do with intuition, faith, divine lore, what the source calls the wisdom of the farmer. And on the other side, you have the solar philosophy, or beta, which is all about pure reason, what the source calls profane science, cold logic, basically the data of the lab. And the source is crystal clear on this. This was not a natural evolution of ideas. It's framed as a deliberate war waged by the solar philosophy with the goal of completely erasing and discrediting the lunar. The whole point was to make humanity trust only what could be measured and to just dismiss all those older forms of knowledge as nothing more than superstition. So what happens when this philosophical script breaks out into the real world? Well, the source argues that this propaganda then becomes the justification for major historical events, reframing them as these huge, large-scale, profane rituals. Let's just take the American Revolution as an example. The source completely dismisses it as a genuine struggle for freedom. Instead, it's called the In the Pen Dance. Basically, a staged performance that used those new solar ideals like liberty just to create a brand new pillar of control in Washington. The French Revolution, in this view, was something way more violent. A chaotic solar reset. The source calls it a ritual of fire, which is the element of the sun, right? Designed to just brutally burn away the old lunar-based order and forcibly install a new, supposedly rational republic. All of this, the cipher, the philosophical war, the revolutions, it all builds to the ultimate conclusion of the source's argument. And this conclusion is what it calls the Great Disconnection, the moment that new operating system was finally and successfully installed. So what's the final verdict from this text? That from the perspective of these so-called ringmasters, the Enlightenment was their single most successful mini reset. And that word, mini, it's kind of chilling, isn't it? It implies this was just one step in a much larger ongoing game. And what about the result for everyone else, for the pawns in this game? Well, this quote from the source really sums it up powerfully. The plan was to plunge them into a bright age of profound spiritual darkness. In other words, an era that celebrated intellectual light, but did so only by severing humanity's deeper spiritual connection to the world around them. The source we've looked at today repeatedly calls this whole thing a game. And if we follow that logic, it really forces us to ask a big question. If the Enlightenment was just one major move on the board, what might the rules of that game look like today? That's the question this source really leaves us with.